Salve a tutti, sono andato in Olanda per presentare al convegno 2011 della Moving Ethics, che è l'organizzazione mondiale per l'etica clinica, il movimento ironista. Quando ho mandato l'abstract vi giuro che credevo non avrebbero accettato mai, perché io parlavo di etica in generale, perché c'è bisogno dell'ironia in morale oggi, nel 2011 appunto. Hanno accettato l'abstract, io sono andato e questa è la prima presentazione a un congresso mondiale del movimento ironista. Divertitevi, spero!
Well, to be honest, I have no idea about why they have accepted my abstract. Either way, I'm grateful. The reason why I have no idea is because my presentation will be not about clinical ethics. I will be about practical ethics. The question that I will try to answer is why do we need irony in ethics? So, well, what is the importance of irony in morality, in ethics? During the 60s, that great crucible of both excellent and awful ideas, it was said that irony was the weapon of the middle classes, a way of pretending everything was acceptable, otherwise praises were sung to the crippling belly laugh, an aggressive, destructive irony that washed away every trace of tradition and traditionalism. Morality, ethics, they do not need either of these types of irony. But if it does not need the little laugh of the middle class and not even the destructive mockery of the change-hungry young or poor, what kind of irony does ethics or morality need? Yeah. The Giubberosse Café in Florence has a very long and illustrious history. When I started to organize events there in 2005, I felt very intimidated. It was, and it still is, the café of Italian cultural avant-garde. There my grandfather knew and became friend with Roberto Magari and Noel Pracher, and it was the literary coffee of Ottone Rosai, and even before, it had been the café where futurism were founded by Filippo Marinetti. In short, the very nerve center of Florentine culture. In 2005, therefore, when it was decided to transform our cultural association into an intellectual movement, we chose to present the new project precisely there. In the 5th of December of 2005, the Ironist movement was founded. But why make irony the inspiration of a philosophical movement? What need is there to laugh and to joke in the intellectual world? And if there is need, once again, what kind of irony is needed? When I was a boy, my grandfather told me about Fichte philosophy of the reflected man. There is a time when a man mirrors himself, a moment when he sees himself, and in the end, only in the end, a moment when he recognizes himself. Irony works in the same way. There is a time when the ironic assertion is posed, a second moment when it is logically understood, and a third moment, a magical moment, in which what was understood in the second moment as a sentence logically provided with meaning is found to be provided with a second meaning, a brilliant, unexpected, fulfilling meaning. But however beautiful, bright, fascinating, what do we do with irony? Why can't we just go do good research, find what is good and write it, divulge it, if needed, inculcate it, impose it, if people are such beasts as to refuse to simply do it when we suggest this to them? When I was a boy, my grandfather never answered me, and even later, He never answered me much. To my question, he listed the possibilities that could logically follow, but that was it. He waited for me to choose, apart from exceptional cases, obviously, but why such a reticence? A man of culture must have an opinion. I used to get cross. It's all Worf's fault. Had he continued being a chemist? But no, he just had to become a literate pensioner. Had he written just one book, taken just a second degree, or maybe a third, but no, he had to go and study American Indians, and not in books, for real. By living with them, he started reading letters about the customs of those strange peoples. He thought he was talking about anthropology, and he ended up with destroying the basis of ordinary logic. Okay, maybe not, let's not exaggerate. What's certain is that Benjamin Lee Worf discovered that there was not just one possible logic. He discovered that Aristotle had identified a totally arbitrary system, one of many, functional, ingenious, if you like, but without exclusive rights. As long as we were talking about relativism in the work of Hume or even James, it was not too serious. All theories, all stories, at least ordinary people thought they were. And, to tell the truth, also a large number of philosophers thought the same. Instead, in 1938, Benjamin Lee Worf observed the tribes that did not contemplate the concept of space and time. He started with Opis. Never mind, they held the world in a different way from ours, but at least they divided it. Obviously, the concept of space and time became relative, and then worst come. The Nootkas of Vancouver, they didn't even divide the world. We cannot even imagine a language with no only nouns or only verbs, and therefore, if no fixed category is imaginable for everyone, end of categories as a parameter, in a word, end of absolute categories. How can a category that a vast group of people does not know, has never suspected existed, and whose absence has never caused any practical problem, be absolute? In 1938, therefore, even if the world did not know about it yet, absolute truth was that. Reality was finally a series of random human perception to venture upon. And the most interesting question to answer came up. The question I will try to answer. How can you create a morality in a world where everything is relative? Not in a reality where everything is relative only for know-it-all. A reality where everything is relative for all human beings. A reality in which if all the representatives of all cultures sat down on a table, they would not be in agreement about any ontological assumption. The response of the international community was initially simple and effective. The strongest imposes his own morality, imposing first his ontology, not through just one or more wars, but above all through a spectacular Debordian invasion. It was not a bad solution. The Western Empire lasted nearly a century of glories thanks to this system, but we found ourselves contemplating a phase of transition. The last ones of this system push more and more to access the privileges of the first one, and it's clear that there are not enough resources to provide them with those privileges. The image of that semi-divine surplus of useless and demagoguing consumption that nourished the eyes of the less fortunate until making them march today like a battalion towards the growth of the GDP is crumbling due to the fact that it's simply not achievable. It never was, but as long as we were far from the goal, we could believe in it. Now we are almost all near to it, and we can clearly see that the goal itself was just a picture hung to a wall. There has been a buffer period between 1938 and 1998, more or less, that is between the discovery of absolute relativism and the moment when the masses actually began to perceive it. They became aware of it thanks to the great progress of the means of mass communication. As long as the other is just a theory, you're not afraid of it. When you can chat and video phone the other in real time, that other who has completely different ontological parameters from yours is more real. In the meanwhile, almost all the Hopis have died or now manage prestigious casinos in New Mexico, but the visible differences are still so many and has to be of an explosive impact. The advent of web required birth of new ideas, new analyses, new workshops and philosophical movements. At this point, the situation is the morality that was imposed because it was true collapsed in front of relativism. The morality that it was imposed because it was strong collapsed because it made promises that couldn't be fulfilled. Everyone can create a morality in his own house and spread it thanks to the internet, but the two big morality groups that appear on the scene are those of conflict on one hand, and of dialogue in the other end. The first claims that we have to fight viciously to grab the few remaining resources, and the second, that we must reorganize ourselves such as to be able to find new resources and new lifestyles. Although I uphold the latter, I also clearly see the reasons for the former, and I wouldn't dismiss it without consideration. First of all, an opinion of this kind is justified by fear, which is always a bad advisor, of course, but a bad advisor that is difficult not to follow. Is justified also and above all with love. Love that makes clannishness, love intended as extended egoism, which is good, I believe, only when it is extended to the whole human race. About the scarceness of resources on the planet, another major division is between those who see human extinction as desirable and those who think it should be postponed as long as possible. Despite what may be apparent at first sight, the overwhelming majority of human beings is inclined towards the first option. The extinctionists, I believe, verge on 99% of the global population. An extinctionist is one who, day by day, actually destroys the habitability of our planet. If you ask the question normally, almost everyone will declare that the human race must survive, but then, if you really insist, you will see that almost everyone asserts that the thing they care for most is the pleasure of as many goods as possible, for as long as possible, for them and their children. The consequence of this ingenuous opinion is the extinction of the human race. You understand this, the average human being doesn't. Now, I want to assume that here in this room there are many who think, as I do, that the survival of the human race is a righteous and important thing. If this isn't so, even better. If we want extinction, all we have to do is wait, grab everything we can and bestially enjoy it. But if instead we want to let shine in the river of history the ability that is typical of our race and only of our race to choose not to become extinct, then we do have a problem. Because, as I was saying, while all of you understand that hedonistic behavior is equivalent to extinctionist behavior, most human beings don't. Even worse, they want, in each and every way, very strongly, not to understand it. And it's here that Socrates' method, so loved by Kierkegaard, came in handy, the method of irony. If we don't have a good method to impose a morality anymore, it may be time that morality rises from the interiority of our listeners. It may be time to become skilled acrobats who make contradiction rise from inside the soul, spirit, the human intellect. We must not be afraid to look like clowns. We have a plethora of philosophers who used irony as their main tool. In Italy, Giordano Bruno; in France, Voltaire; in Holland, Erasmus; Russell; in England. The entire history of philosophy has always been imbued with irony. Often irony has worked in big political struggles, and it's being used widely on a social level too, both among philosophers and professional comedians, to try to communicate messages. However, on the social level, this huge resource hasn't yet shown its full potential. That's why, for two reasons. On one hand, the famous philosophers who used it were always a minority and were treated with great suspicion by all the others, who in most cases incited their followers not to listen to them, since they were considered dangerous and misleading thinkers. On the other hand, the populace took possession of irony, using it in two very particular ways. While a good use of irony comes from the identification with the community and tends to advise in favor of improvement of customs and ideals, popular irony often tended either to rise from the distancing from the common good to deride the weak, and thus feel stronger, or to identify with community, not to work for its good, but to work for its short-term good, the respect of the theory without a further research, in a word, toward its harm. For example, to get across the idea that consuming is good, that listening to intellectuals is for idiots, and that television is the only real place where a good family can be together happily. The message here in pill version, it could say this: let's prepare thoroughly before talking about a topic. Let's identify ourselves with the common good, and let's make an effort to see clearly the consequences of what we want to do before doing it. Let's use irony to stimulate our consciousness, in our consciousness, the birth of a critical mind. Let's avoid imposing solutions. Let's propose reasoning. In philosophy, often there is not new ideas, and there is never a completely new one. And it's not up to me to judge how much, if this one is new. But what reassures me is to know that in philosophy it's not important for an idea to be new, especially in moral philosophy. Above all, what's needed is that the idea effectively describes the time in which it appears and proposes an interesting action in order to change that time for the better. And about this, I think that the application of irony can do a great deal. And here I would like to end with a joke, but I thought it had been a little bit too obvious.